We'll make a start. If anyone else joins us, that's fine. So we're looking at meaning of mitzvahs. Each week we're going to try and take a different mitzvah and try and understand the meaning of that mitzvah, bearing in mind the words of the Rambam, who set out to explain every single one of the mitzvot, and concluded that although we can and should try and discern the meaning of mitzvot, ultimately we can never truly understand the divine intellect, and therefore we can only estimate the actual meaning of it. As I said last time, in the Bereshit, there are very few mitzvot in the Sedras, and therefore we'll move around a little bit. I'll try and make a connection to the weekly Sedra. So this week we read about Avraham and Sarah's hospitality. Three strangers come and visit them. He invites them into the tent, and he asks Sarah to make bread or biscuits for them. In fact, it was matzah, whichever it's Pesach time. But what's interesting, it says that Abraham ran to his flock and he took a calf, he took a tender and young calf, and he gave it to the youth to prepare it. And then it says, he took butter and milk and the calf, and he placed it in front of the men. The other question is, milk and meat. How can he give them milk and meat? Well, first, the easiest answer is the Torah hadn't been given yet. There's no prohibition of milk and meat at that time. Second answer would be, although we would say that our ancestors actually kept the whole of the Torah even before it was given, but the Dasakenim actually says, no, he gave them the milky foods first in order so they could eat very quick, something very easy for them to digest, and then he gave them the meat afterwards. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You don't have to wait after having milk before you eat meat. It's only the other way around. So I thought we'd look at the prohibition of eating milk and meat together. I'll share with you on the screen the sources. Okay, so as I said, you have to wait until you get into Sefer Shemos, book of Exodus for that mitzvah. It's in Parshas Mishpatim. But we know it's also repeated in Parshas Kitisa as well. And in fact, 3 times the Torah tells us those famous words. So the Pasuk reads, the choice of your first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of Hashem your God. You should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. So that is the source of the prohibition of meat and milk. And as I said, this mentioned actually the same phrase is mentioned 3 times in the Torah, and that is why Chazal understood that there's a prohibition not to cook meat and milk together, not to eat a mixture of meat and milk together, nor can you benefit from any mixture of meat and milk. So we're going to try to understand firstly why is this prohibition of meat and milk? Why are we forbidden to eat mixtures of milk and meat, cook them together and benefit from them? And after that, try and understand why did the Torah repeat it 3 times, and why does it say lot of Asher? Why does it use the language of cooking a kid in its mother's milk? So firstly, to understand this idea of why are we forbidden to eat milk and meat. So let us follow a classic commentary on the Torah. Lot of Asher Gedi, K'maaseh b'nei necha, v'choshvim lahasik b'zeh ha'atzach the perus of a mikveh. He said the Torah prohibited us doing this because this was the practice of some Gentiles. They used to cook milk and meat together. They would cook a kid in its mother's milk, believing that it guaranteed them, it assured them success in raising fruit and cattle. So they're taking from the animal kingdom, and it was not really the fruit kingdom, but milk really is the fruit of its mother, right? It's the produce of the mother animal. And therefore, they believe that if you put the two together in some way, that was a way of generating divine favor, but obviously not God's favor in terms of our God, but in terms of the idolatrous God. So there we see an idea that it's in order to dissuade us from copying the practices of other nations. And that actually explains why the other Mepharshim, we haven't got time to look at it now, but otherwise, other commentaries explain why particularly does it mention this prohibition after this idea of bringing the first fruits. And they say again, because once we're involved in bringing offerings to God, we were very concerned that people may then try to include in that offering the types of offerings that other nations did as well. To avoid that, it was kept away. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper. So based on that, says the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch is a 13th century work by an unknown author, in which he goes through all of the Torah and explains every single one of the mitzvot in the parsha in which they come. So he says the following: the root of this mitzvah is to understand the same reasoning for this mitzvah is what we wrote about about a previous mitzvah in relation to a witch. And so we know that the Torah prohibits witchcraft, divination, dabbling in the occult, or any type of black magic. All those things are forbidden. It says that this mitzvah of the prohibition of cooking and eating mother's milk shares the same root as the. Why? There are certain things in this world that the mixing of them is forbidden to us. We're not allowed to mix or dabble or be involved in certain things in this world. Someone's phone's ringing. Okay, not mine. Okay, so that's the first thing. So he says, just like, and he writes, if we were to look back at this idea of witchcraft, it says that, yes, there are different forces and there are different possibilities in this world, but there are certain things we are not allowed to go near, mix in and get involved in. That's the same thing with milk and meat. Yes, we're allowed to enjoy milk, we're allowed to enjoy meat, but mixing of them, that is something we have to avoid. And he says, "Ve'efshar sheta'arugos habasa im hachalav k'maasei habishul yeh sibas asuru min ha'yisod ha'du." He said it's possible that for the reason for the prohibition of mixing milk to milk through the process of cooking is from this foundation. So he's saying it's possible that the Torah prohibited us to cook meat and milk together based on this idea, the same idea of avoiding witchcraft is that there are certain things that we just have to avoid in this world. He says, and there's a small, perhaps, a proof for this. He says, perhaps we can understand. He says that maybe the proof to this is the fact that we're forbidden to mix these things even without eating them. So the Torah doesn't say you mustn't eat meat and milk together, although we're not allowed to, because the rabbis derived that. But the Torah says you mustn't cook them together. So even merely cooking them, merely just mixing them, is forbidden, not necessarily just eating them. So it's not. So this straight out he says that the prohibition of eating meat and milk together is not because any damage it could cause to us. So this totally dispels what people think. This is a hugely widely misconception that the laws of kashrut, including the prohibition of meat and milk, are somehow health laws. They are dietary laws that are there for our good, to promote good health. That is absolutely not the case. Yeah. Again, quite clearly we can see a proof to that because there are plenty of Jewish people who adhere strictly to the laws of kashrut who are very unhealthy. Similarly, there are many non-Jewish people who eat whatever it is they want to eat, the things that are forbidden to us, including meat and milk together, who are perfectly healthy. So to suggest that this prohibition of meat and milk and any of the laws of kashrut to do with health is a complete fallacy. So that's the first thing to see. This is not about physical health. There is some sort of spiritual aspect to this, and connected to this idea of witchcraft, which things we may not know about, we have to avoid. So the Sefer says, so firstly we're told, don't cook it together, meaning even if you don't come to eat it, it's forbidden because it's about mixing them. However, we are then in another place, as we'll see in Parshas Ki Tisa, the prohibition is repeated, and from that we derive that not only mustn't you mix them, but you mustn't eat it. If you accidentally mix them together, you mustn't eat it. nor, even if you don't eat it, nor can you benefit from it. So there's something intrinsically forbidden about mixtures of meat and milk, regardless of whether you cooked it or whether you ate it. You mustn't have any benefit from it whatsoever. And he says, he says the truth is, he says, this is set out of duress, and we still need knowledge of the mystic. Meaning, we don't really to say there's some sort of mystical basis for the prohibition of mixing meat and milk is not wholly satisfying, because we still haven't really got to the root of why. What is it that's mystically problematic about this mixture? So he quotes the Rambam, the Maimonides. Rambam Zichrono Livracha, Kata Be'inyan Tam Acher. He writes about this in relation to another reason. Amma, he says, Yesh Ovdei Avodah Zorah, Ya'avdu Ma'aset Haruvas Basa Imachalav. Ulachein Harachiku HaTorah Osat Haruvas. He says, there are some idolaters that worship this act of mixing milk and meat and milk, and that is why the Torah distanced that mixture. But then he quotes a passage from Esther and says, he said, this is still not worthwhile for me. It's not totally satisfying to say, we don't really like saying the reason why the Torah prohibits something is because other nations do this. It's not completely, it doesn't really resonate totally with us to say, well, the reason why we can't do this is because other people do this. But the thing is, you can see the Sefer Chinuch here is struggling, and even the Rambam doesn't seem to go into much more detail than that to actually give us a reason for it. There's some sort of mystical, Kabbalistic reason that the mixtures of milk and milk are prohibited. We can't necessarily totally understand that. And we'll develop that a little bit more further. We move on to the Chovos HaLevavos, who says this very quickly in his introduction, where he sets out the different types of mitzvahs that there are, mitzvahs that apply to us physically, and then mitzvahs that apply to us emotionally or spiritually. He says the second set are precepts received on the authority of revelation, meaning God revealed his will to us, which reason neither obligates nor rejects, such as the prohibition of milk and meat, chutness, the wearing of garments of woven of wool and linen, flax, kalayim, the sewing of diverse seeds together, which is all forbidden, and similar precepts whose reason for being prohibited or obligatory is unknown to us. So, as we know, there are different types of mitzvahs that we have. There are mitzvahs which we call Mishpatim, which is actually, ironically, the Sedra that we just saw the prohibition in is Pashas Mishpatim, which sets out the rational laws. The laws that rabbis say, even if the Torah hadn't told us to do or not do, we would have discerned ourselves. So, for example, natural justice, not to oppress the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger. All those things are mishpatim. They are justice. They are things that we would be able to understand, that they make sense to us. However, there's another set of mitzvahs known as chukim. They are statutes, things which God told us to do or not do, but never actually revealed the reason for them, and we, with a limited intellect, are unable to understand why. Again, you give it. Now, I guess that's not totally satisfying to be able to say, well, God told us to do it, and we can't understand. It's very difficult for us to be able to accept that, because as human beings, we like to be able to. We only like to accept things that we can measure and understand and make sense of. It's very difficult for us to be able to say, you know what, God had a reason for it. We can't understand that reason, but we do it anyway. And we recognize that is very challenging. But you see, we try and find an analogy in life. There's lots of things, when you buy an electrical appliance and you read the instructions, how it works, do you totally understand how it works? No, not necessarily. You accept that the designer, the architect, the technician has a superior knowledge of this item. You follow those instructions because that's what you want to do in order to make the item work. It's the same thing. God, when he created the world, set in an order that makes sense, and sometimes only to him. And part of being our humility is to accept that sometimes we can't totally understand why that is, but we accept it because we discern that is the will of God, and that is the purpose. There is a purpose to it in order that we and the world function in the way that we are designed to do for all our benefits. And Rav Hirsch, in his work called The 19 Letters, now Rav Hirsch in the 19th century was faced by the rise of the Reform movement with a small r, and he wrote a defense of Orthodox Judaism. And in it was called The 19 Letters. And in it, he writes about, and again, he goes through the different categories of mitzvahs that we have. As I said, one category is we have Mishpatim, natural justice laws, but we also have Chukim, arbitrary or apparently inexplicable statutes. So he says the thing here, the same thoughtful regard which you show to man, show as well to every lower being, to the earth which bears and sustains us, to the world of animals and plants, to your own body, to your own mental faculties, to your ego, that which is most of all your own. It is the same justice which you owe to other human beings. What in the case of the Mishpatim results from the concept of identical personality, flows here from the fundamental notion of equal subordination to God, who defends all which is lower in order and subject to you against your caprice and the abolitions of unregulated will. Okay, now to translate that into English, because that came from the original German, what is he actually saying there? He's saying that in the same way that we are able to accept those laws which make sense to us, we also have to be able to accept those laws that don't make sense to us. And we accept them equally. And he goes on, he says, your duties towards humanity are more intelligible to you simply because you have only to think of yourself, your own views and feelings in order to recognize and sympathize with the demands and the needs of your fellow human being. So it can make sense when the Torah says don't steal, we can understand why we shouldn't steal because we don't want someone to steal from us. That's quite simple. However, if we're told don't eat milk or meat, well, we don't necessarily understand how does that affect me. We can't. It doesn't make sense to us, and therefore the danger is we would reject it. Here he's saying is don't reject things just because they don't make sense to you. He goes on. Could you put yourself as thoroughly in the place of other beings? Could you even understand the conditions of the union and combined activity of your own body and soul? You would find it as easy to comprehend Chukim as Mishpatim. So he's saying that yes, Mishpatim are easy to understand because we are human beings and we understand the feelings of other human beings. Chukim, if we were able to put ourselves in the position of other beings and ultimately God Himself, we would be able to understand Chukim as much as we can understand Mishpatim. The fact that we can't, that's why we can't understand the Chukim. So they ask of you, so these Chukim, these laws which don't have a discernible reason, they ask you to regard all beings as God's possessions. Destroy none, abuse none, waste nothing, employ all things wisely. The kinds and species of plants and animals of God's order, mingle them not. And that's really the key phrase here. Yeah, that if God wanted certain things to be mixed together, if He wanted there to be a plant made of wool and linen, if He wanted to be a material like that, if He wanted seeds to be crossbred, He would have created it. If He wanted there to be in this world a mixture of milk and meat, He would have created that. The fact that He didn't means that some reason God has for not doing so. And if it's not for us to come along and say, you know what, we know better, we'll do it. All creatures are servants in the household of creation, respecting the feelings and desires of beasts. Respect the body of man even when the personality has departed. Respect your own body as a receptacle, messenger and instrument of the Spirit. Limit and subdue your impulses and animal actions under the law. God, that they be used in a manner truly human and holy for the upbuilding of the holy purpose of the human race. The man sink not into a mere beast. Respect your soul in nourishing your body. Give the latter only so much and such food as will permit it to be a pure, obedient messenger of the world to the soul to the world, but not as such as to produce sluggishness or sensuality. Therefore, conceal and elevate. Do not esteem too highly thy animal part, in order that in the end all contradictory dispositions be eliminated from you, and even the beast-like become truly human. Finally, respect yourself in your purest emanation, your word. Okay, so very poetically, what he's saying is that These things everything was created for a reason, for a purpose. We have an obligation, just we have an obligation to respect our fellow human beings, to respect ourselves, and to respect all these other creations in this world, and not to mix those things that weren't made to be mixed. An animal, a mother, was not meant to be mixed together with what she produces in order to sustain her young. It's meant to come out of her body in order to go into the body of another, not to be mixed together with her body or with the body of her young. So that's Rav Hirsch, I think, very powerfully an idea behind the prohibition of mixing milk and meat. We now go back to in time we've got about 5 more minutes left. In time we go back to the Sefer HaChinuch and go further on now. So that was when we first saw it was in mitzvah number 92. But if we go forward to mitzvah number 113, it's the same mitzvah, not to eat meat and milk together. It's in Parshas Kitisa. So not to eat milk and meat together, they've been cooked together. As the verse says, you should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And this verse comes to prohibit eating and benefiting from milk and meat. So now this is moving on to the second point, which is why does the Torah write it 3 times? Why does it say do not cook it? Why doesn't it just say do not eat it or do not benefit from it? What's the need for 3 times? So it says, don't let it be difficult for you. Why didn't the Torah tell us explicitly not to eat meat and milk together? Why does it only say do not cook it together? And only say it in the language of cooking. If it meant don't eat, say don't eat. Why say don't cook 3 times? So he says, you can answer it in this way. He said there is something different and novel about the prohibition of eating milk and meat together than there is in all other forbidden foods. There are many other things that we aren't allowed to eat. But there's something specifically different about this. Because when it comes to other forbidden foods, a person is only liable for having eaten them if they benefit from eating it. Meaning, if you ate it and you enjoyed it, you had the normal physical sensation from eating it, only then will you be liable. However, when it comes to meat and milk, if you merely swallow it without benefiting from it, you don't enjoy the taste of it, you merely swallow it, and you swallow it and it's so hot that it actually is unpleasant. The surif garano body, and it actually burns your throat while you're eating it. So there's no pleasure whatsoever, no benefit whatsoever. Who can use when any other similar way of eating without pleasure? There's no benefit from it. Nevertheless, you would be held accountable for having eaten it. As our sages said, the Perek Sheni of the Gemara, that's the very reason why the Torah didn't write it as do not eat. In order to tell us that you'll be held liable for eating it even if you didn't benefit or enjoy it. So let's explain again. If the Torah had written do not eat meat and milk together, that would only be held accountable if we enjoyed eating it together. How would we know that we'd be liable if you didn't? Only since the Torah says, or Tavashel, do not cook it. And it wrote it 3 times so we can learn not only mustn't you cook it, but you mustn't eat it, even if there's no hana, even if there's no benefit or enjoyment. And thirdly, you mustn't benefit from it, meaning you can't sell mixtures of meat and milk. However, he says, in the Komakom, nevertheless, if you were to eat it in this way without getting any enjoyment from it, you wouldn't be held liable for it, meaning you wouldn't be punished for it. However, merely the Torah is, by putting it in the language of do not cook, is telling us that it is prohibited. One is forbidden to do so. It's all about the mixing. Okay, so we carry on in the Sefer HaChinuch. He goes a bit further. There's now another question. He says that even though our sages, again in the Gemara in Chulin said that the Torah wrote it 3 times, the prohibition of cooking it, to lamed, so achila v'ism bishul b'azana, in order to teach us 3 things. That we mustn't eat it, we mustn't cook it, and we mustn't benefit from it. In Rolanu Limnos Becheshbon Halabim Ela Hashnayim. Having said that the Torah tells us 3 things about it that are forbidden, nevertheless, they still tell us that you'd only be liable on account of 2. We only count it as 2 prohibitions, cooking and eating. We don't count it as 3. Because the truth is that eating and benefiting are actually one and the same thing. They're synonymous with each other. As our sages say, also there, wherever the Torah says don't eat or not you don't have to eat it. It implies whether you eat it or whether you benefit from it. Because eating, the Torah refers to all types of benefit in the language of eating, because eating is the most obvious type of benefit. Because it is the most constant form of enjoyment, and it's something that's sort of necessary for a person. And when the Torah says that, and that's with every, and he quotes a verse in Shemos that talks about Aaron and the others and the elders who, when they have seen God, it says they ate and they drank. Now again, the commentators said that that's not literal. It means they enjoy, they experience physical enjoyment. So we are calling eating benefiting, but it doesn't necessarily mean the same. Okay, so having said that, we're left with a question. He says, "You then grab me and say to me, in pain, if that's the case, if we're only counting the prohibitions of eating and cooking, why did the Torah list it 3 times? We know the Torah only ever writes things that are necessary. Why write something a 3rd time when it appears to be unnecessary?" So he answers the following. So this is the question. To write it twice would be sufficient. The Torah, all the Torah needs to say was, don't cook it and don't eat it. And from that we would say that there are 3 prohibitions of cooking, eating, and benefiting. Why do we need to write it 3 times? So he says, I can answer you the thing. If it's written in one place, don't cook, then we'd learn you mustn't cook it, the prohibition of cooking. And then the second place, in another place it would say don't eat it, which we know would include the prohibition of benefiting and eating, as we said. Logically, we wouldn't need to write it a 3rd time. If by knowing that when it says eating, it means also benefiting, we'll know there are 3 prohibitions. There's no need to write it a 3rd time. There's no need for any more. Because we'd already know that eating includes benefiting from Lot Ochel, which we said is what we principally have in our hands already. About Aksha, however, now, however, since we know we don't, the Torah doesn't say Achila anyway, it doesn't say you mustn't eat it, it says you mustn't cook it 3 times. Since the Torah doesn't say you mustn't eat it, we can't learn that you mustn't have benefit from it. Only once it writes it a 3rd time. Since the Torah wrote, do not cook 3 times, we can learn, do not cook, do not eat. And the 3rd time is to tell us, do not benefit from it. If you can't ask any further, you say, oh, why not write one of those 3 at least? Right, do not eat it. And it'd be enough with 2. He says, because the truth is, we've explained that the Torah didn't need to mention it in the language of eating. Because we've said it's not just about eating. We said even if eating it in not the normal way, we need to know that you'd be liable even for eating it not in the normal way. If it only written it, do not eat, we would have thought, you only held accountable if you eat it and enjoy it. But if not, not. Therefore, we couldn't write it as do not eat, but only as do not cook. From that, we can derive do not cook, do not eat, even if you don't enjoy it and don't have benefit. So the Madnu Me'atzad, Ki Masha Amritu from the Rav, as the sages said, Chad la'asu achila, Chad la'asu le'anav, Chad la'asu bishul. And therefore, that's why our sages say it's written once to tell us the prohibition of eating it, once to tell us the prohibition of benefiting from it, and once to tell us the prohibition of benefiting from it. But it's not to come and tell us the third prohibition, but only to tell us that we mustn't have benefit from it. Okay, so let's bring us back to the beginning. So the Torah says, "Do not cook a kid in its mother's milk." We've explained. Well, we've seen how the truth is. We don't really know why that is the case. We know that other nations used to do that, and therefore to avoid doing that, we were prohibited from doing it. Sefer Chinuch says that there's some idea related to the reason why witchcraft is prohibited. There's some sort of mystical basis for it, that we mustn't dabble and be involved in mixing things together that are meant to be mixed together. Says the use of the heart that there are certain things which we just have to accept that are revealed to us that we can't understand. Similarly, as Rav Hirsch says, these ideas chukim, that God set the world in a certain order, had a good plan for it, meant certain things to be mixed together, some things not to be. We have to respect that. If something isn't meant to be mixed together, we shouldn't come along and mix it together, even if we don't understand it. We have to respect it, like we respect the laws. Just as we accept the laws that we can understand, so too we have to accept the laws that we can't understand. And then thirdly, we saw that the reason why the Torah writes it 3 times is in order that we can understand, and the reason why it writes it as do not cook it is in order that we can learn that there's a prohibition of cooking it, there's a prohibition of eating it even if you don't enjoy it or have any benefit from it, and there's a third prohibition of having any benefit from it whatsoever. Okay, so there we have it. Some reasons behind the meaning of mitzvahs of meat and milk. Okay, we'll stop there. Any observations, comments, disagreements? No. Okay. Keep well, everybody. Please God. Next week we'll have another. Next Wednesday, same time, 12:30, we'll have another mitzvah to understand the meaning of. Keep well, take care.
Thanks very much.